This is K.M. Weiland, and you are listening to the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, Archetypal Character Arcs, Part 21, The Flat Archetype of the Mentor. And so we come to the final archetype within the life arc cycle, the well-known and well-loved mentor. This final flat archetype, which precedes the final transformation of the mage arc, is one of the most significant within human storytelling. Indeed, next to the hero, the mentor is perhaps our most well-known of all mythic archetypes. The wise old man, bearded, of course, shows up time and again. Obi-Wan, Gandalf, Dumbledore. In Sacred Contracts, Carolyn Mace references the origin of the word mentor. The mentor is a teacher in whom you can place your implicit trust. The word comes from the character in the Odyssey to whom Odysseus, on setting out for Troy, had entrusted the care of his house and the education of his son Telemachus. Mentors do more than just teach. They pass on wisdom and refine their students' character. Without the beard, the mentor need not be explicitly male, of course. The mentor is simply a character who has advanced well into the elder phase and has proven himself or herself in all the great tests of life. Unlike the previous flat archetype of elder, the mentor is a character who has now undertaken the first journey of life's third act, the crone arc, and risen above the physical limitations of old age into a transcendent wisdom and even power. The mentor character will have one more possible transformative change arc to undergo, that of the mage's surrender of life itself. But for now, this is a character who straddles the balance point of life and death and has come to a sober peace with both. As such, the mentor is in a prime position to not just guide the young, as the previous archetype of elder did, but to initiate them by calling them into the quest. The mentor archetype can be thought of as that of coming full circle. The previous arc is that of crone, the subsequent arc is that of mage, and the subsequent possible negative archetypes are those of the passive miser and the aggressive sorcerer. As referenced in the discussion about the first flat archetype of the child, the mentor shares surprising commonalities with the young innocent. The life cycle can be seen to represent a coming full circle, from fool to holy fool. The mentor, with all his or her hard-earned wisdom, represents, if not a return to innocence, then at least a return to understanding it. What was lost in childhood has been regained, but with the compounded interest of experience. As such, the mentor is particularly fit to counsel the first act archetypes of maiden and hero, since by now the mentor both knows what it was like to struggle with these life transitions, and also that these youngsters must struggle through to transformation. In The Hero with 1,000 Faces, Joseph Campbell speaks to some of the paradoxes of this penultimate archetype. He says, protective and dangerous, motherly and fatherly at the same time, this supernatural principle of guardianship and direction unites in itself all the ambiguities of the unconscious, thus signifying the support of our conscious personality by that other larger system, but also the inscrutability of the guide that we are following, to the peril of all our rational ends. The challenge of the subsequent mage arc is that of letting go of the world and the youngsters in his charge. But for the mentor, that time is not yet come. And this is why we see the mentor prominently within the grand kingdom-saving adventures of the hero. Thanks to the just completed crone arc, the mentor has integrated the surrender of power in a healthy way that now allows a return to the heart of life's important power struggles. The mentor is not king any longer. Rather, the mentor holds the more independent and, in some ways, even more powerful position of mentoring the king. The mentor is no longer confined to the palace, as during the king arc. Now, the mentor is free to wander the world, ever on a mission to protect what must soon be left behind. When the mentor spies trouble, he or she often becomes the messenger who arrives to tell king and hero that trouble is on the way and must be dealt with. Symbolically, the mentor's home is the entire kingdom. The character wanders where he or she wills, seeming to neither have nor need any fixed residence. The mentor is welcome wherever he or she goes, revered by all who are pure of heart, and recognize the esteemed status of this worthy and wise elder. Within most stories, the mentor often offers at least a sense of magic. He or she often shows up out of nowhere, perhaps even a stranger, to the younger characters to help, just as the threat to the kingdom is rising. Usually, the mentor is distinct from the elder in that the elder lives in the hut on the edge of the woods, separate from, but still a part of the village, still rooted to normal mortal life. In contrast, the mentor is a wanderer, coming and going as he or she pleases. This is not always literally true within a story, especially modern stories, but because truly archetypal mentors are so rare within our modern world, we almost always instinctively portray them as at least a little otherworldly. And so they do not tend to live within the confines of the hero's village or the king's empire. They arrive and they depart. We can see this even with Dumbledore in the Harry Potter series. Even though he lives in Hogwarts School along with Harry and the other students, Headmaster Dumbledore is often away on his own business. He comes and he goes as he pleases. In other stories, such as The Green Mile and Good Will Hunting, the mentor characters, John Coffey and Sean Maguire respectively, live with or near the other characters for the duration of the story. But they are significant in that they arrive at the beginning of the story and then in some way depart at the end. In completing the previous Crone arc, the mentor made the jump from wise elder to a deeper and more transcendent understanding of life and death, a thematic truth that might perhaps be phrased as life is death and death is life. Most significantly, the completion of the Crone arc marked a coming to peace with impending death, however magically or prosaically you wish to frame that idea within your own story. This truth is inherent within the mentor's ability, not just in guiding younger archetypes through their own age-appropriate transformations, but also in symbolizing something greater and deeper to the up-and-coming world. Here, at the end of life, the mentor represents deeper meaning and the promise to the younger archetypes that if they remain on course and do not give up, then they too may follow the same path all the way to the end. This is particularly significant within the mentor role itself. Chronologically, the mentor is a very old character, near to the final arc and the end of the journey. But the mentor represents a character who has not given up on life or legacy. He or she has great purpose, perhaps more so than any of the preceding archetypes. In many ways, the mentor is defined by compassion for the younger archetypes. Campbell writes that the mentor does not abandon life, turning his regard from the inner sphere of thought-transcending truth, which can be described only as emptiness since it surpasses speech, outward again to the phenomenal world. He perceives without the same ocean of being that he found within. Having surpassed the delusions of his formerly self-assertive, self-defensive, self-concerned ego, he knows without and within the same repose, and he is filled with compassion for the self-terrorized beings who live in fright of their own nightmare. The mentor's role in impacting younger archetypes is perhaps the most obvious of all the flat archetypes. He or she mentors them. Specifically, we know from the familiar hero's journey that the mentor is often the character who arrives at the would-be hero's doorstep, call him to the adventure, and initiate him on his journey. But it is worth noting, again, that even though all these archetypes can and do reference individual people, they are also significant as symbolic aspects of a single psyche, whether author, reader, protagonist, or all three. As such, the mentor represents to the younger archetypes their own symbolic potential. Campbell notes that the mentor is the hero's personification of his destiny to guide and aid him. The mentor is a character who demands change. The only reason a mentor shows up in a story is to make something happen. Unlike other flat archetypes, or even change archetypes, come to that, who wait until the need for change demands they act, the mentor is always a catalyst. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. That is the mentor. And when the mentor shows up, the student's life will be forever changed. The mentor is, of course, prominent in stories that feature the hero arc. The mentor can be seen to be most active in these stories since he or she will often need to physically accompany the hero at least part of the way. If the mentor is instead helping a king, the mentor character is perhaps more likely to fill an advisory role, since the king is perfectly capable of taking action and fighting his own battles. Unlike the hero, the king is more likely to recognize the mentor's value and want to protect him or her from physical danger. The mentor may or may not need this protection, but will probably humor the king, if only to give the king the opportunity to do his own transformative growth. Mentor stories are often big stories, since mentors don't show up for any little old problem that can be handled by an earlier flat archetype. This is perhaps why the mentor is most prominent in hero and king arcs, since these two arcs mark the thresholds or doorways of no return between the first and second act and the second and third act, respectively. Often the magical quality of the mentor lends itself to stories with a supernatural or fantastical bend. Even in stories with real-world settings, a mentor character will often have psychic abilities or perhaps just a sixth sense, such as the old countrywoman Queenie Turrell in the historical series Larkrise to Candleford. Now, it's true, Queenie could be an elder since she is not on a mission and doesn't leave her village, but she also has some decided mentor mage qualities. Now, some further examples of the mentor archetype include the following, and as always, you can visit my site and its story structure database for structural analyses of some of these. We have John Coffey in The Green Mile, Dr. Sean Maguire in Good Will Hunting, Morpheus in The Matrix, The White in the Lightbringer series, Queenie Turrell in Larkrise to Candleford, Glinda the Good Witch in The Wizard of Oz, Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars: A New Hope, Albus Dumbledore in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, among others, Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, and Mentor in The Odyssey. And with this episode, we have reached the end of our exploration of the 6 transformative character arcs, as well as 12 potential negative archetypes and 6 flat or resting archetypal periods between the change arcs. But stay tuned. For the next 2 weeks, we'll do a little wrap up, starting next week with a quick discussion of practical ways you can start implementing archetypal character arcs within your own stories. And in the meantime, I hope you'll stop by the site and tell me your opinion. Can you think of any further examples of stories that feature the mentor? If you'd like to be part of the word player community over on my site and join in the conversation on this subject, be sure to stop by the website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. You can always find a transcript of the most recent podcast and add your voice to the discussion by visiting the first post on the site's homepage. And don't forget that if you're looking for an older post, you can always find those by putting the podcast title in the search field at the top of the right-hand column. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Amazon Music, or whatever your favorite podcast platform may be. And if you'd like to do something to support helping writers become authors, it always means a ton if you're able to leave just a quick rating or review on your site of choice. Also, many thanks to those who support my work on Patreon. Your patronage helps make helping writers become authors and its many resources available to writers everywhere. If you're interested in becoming a patron, you can find out more at patreon.com/kmweiland. Thanks so much for listening to the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast, and be sure to check back again next week.